Thank you, everybody, for coming out today. Like I said, if anybody's walking by, come on, stop by. It's going to be a great hour. I'm Dr. Patricia Fulmer. I'm out of Huntsville, Alabama. I work with covalentcareers.com and newgradoptometry.com to bring new grads as much information about optometry and eye care and careers as we can. I do primary care now. I used to do medical tertiary care at a referral center. I was center director there. So a lot of interesting experiences. And I'm joined today with Dr. Josh Johnston and Dr. Dan Epstein. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, give you guys a little background.
So Dr. Dan Epstein, I'm out in New York City. I work in an OD-MD practice, really fast-paced, a lot of disease, definitely a lot of dry eye, and all the chronic diseases.
Great. Yeah, I'm Josh Johnston in Atlanta, Georgia, and with Georgia Eye Partners there. The clinical director as well as a residency director, and it's sort of a tertiary care referral center with cornea, glaucoma, and oculoplastics. And then I also run our dry eye clinic there, which we started, fully embraced it about 4 years ago.
So today we're going to be focusing on dry eye. If you turn on the TV, if you get on Facebook, if you get just about anywhere today, dry eye is kind of out there. I think we would all agree that it's probably a little more talked about now than it was in the past few years. Even so, I think a lot of people are still really afraid to get into that realm, more so than just saying, here's a tear, I'll see you next year. Why do you think that is? Why do you think new graduates especially are maybe a little hesitant to dive right in when we talk about dry eye?
You said new grad, so I'll go this way first. I'm older.
So I think the main issue is that people are sort of like floating when they first start in clinic, that they just want to get through the day. They're not actively looking for diseases. And a lot of these patients, they have dry eye. So if you just survey 20 optometrists, you'll notice that they'll take, oh yeah, a lot of my patients have dry eye, maybe 50, 60, 80%, depending on their practice. But then if you ask them how many are actually being treated actively, it's maybe 20%. So you really have to just go out there and actively treat it, which if you're just trying to get by, it might be a little bit difficult. Then as you get more comfortable in your own office, I think it's something to start implementing into your daily routine.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it starts really at school, and so some of the new grads come out, and some of our residents we see just maybe aren't taught that this is a big thing. And so I was the same way, and graduated school in 2004, and just didn't think dry eye was a very important thing, and sort of ignored it. I would hand patients 3 or 4 boxes of tears and say, try these, we'll see you again next year. So for me, there wasn't a compelling reason that I learned about or I felt was compelling enough to treat until I really embraced the disease. That's through education, awareness, buying into how it helps your patients. It becomes very rewarding once you do this. It's a very rewarding niche. But initially, right out of the gate, I think we're overwhelmed. We don't know what to do. We don't know how to do it. But most importantly, the psychology of this. We don't understand why we need to. And so once that changes for whatever reason, then you get into the mechanics on how to do it.
I think you touched on a really good point. You used a keyword, disease. A lot of people just say, oh, I have dry eye. It's just a condition, or it's not even that. It's just a nuisance more than anything. Almost to both the patient and the clinician. Sometimes clinicians see dry eye as more of a nuisance than a disease that they need to treat. Where do you think the shift needs to come in the clinician's mindset to really start seeing this as a disease that needs to be treated full scope?
Great point. I think there's a lot of awareness. There's new medications. There's so much buzz and awareness about dryness. The shift is occurring. It's very slow, but that mimics other things we see in healthcare. And so I think the biggest opportunity here, biggest lever we can swing open to make this more important is to show the shift in medical eye care. Optometry is a primary eye care provider. We needed to diversify our practice by doing more medical optometry. The easiest way, most common prevalent thing we see day to day is dryness, ocular surface disease, blepharitis, meibomian gland dysfunction, all these things. Dryness, that we see is the easiest thing we can do today if we're trying to do more medical optometry. We have technologies and other things that potentially could disrupt our traditional practice models with online refractions and other various technologies, which, it's not a threat today. I think there's actually a way we can partner together and make it work for both sides. But as things progress, like we see in Canada with opticians refracting there and fitting contacts, this will be here at some point, and so we need to do more of the medical mindset, and this is the most common and prevalent thing you see day to day, and the easiest thing to do if you want to get busy doing that.
And not only is it really prevalent, but sometimes ophthalmologists don't really want to treat it. That especially in the perioperative period, if they're doing cataract surgery or they're doing trabeculectomy, these patients have really bad dry eye from either post-op medications or from the surgery itself. And you end up seeing them because no one else wants to treat the dry eye. So it's really an opportunity for you to not only gain a new patient, but maybe their friends. And this is going to help not only build up your practice, but it's helping the patients. Because the patients, sometimes for years, they've been like, my eye, I'm old, I have old eyes, this is how it's going to be now. But it doesn't have to be. Like you said, we have newer medications, we have better treatments now. It's really something that we can stop. It's not something that has to keep on going year after year.
So why do you think dry eye gets such a bad rep, as a difficult or just really tedious condition to treat? Do you think it's that way? Is that what you found in your practice? And why do you think other clinicians maybe have that perception?
I myself don't think it's tedious. It's actually pretty fulfilling because you have a lot of patients come in, it's like, well, my eyes have been dry. I'm like, okay, how long? And they're like, 10 years. And I'm like, have you never gotten an eye exam in these 10 years? Like, no, every year, and then no one really does anything about it. They give them glasses, they say, you don't have glaucoma, you don't have cataracts, I'll see you next year. But if you could actually help them this one issue that's really been bothering them for all these years, it's no longer a nuisance for me, I would say, because it's something that I've been really overcoming for the patient. For me, it's really a backbone of my practice, because for me, probably 80% of my patients have dry eye, and I'm really trying to actively treat them as well.
Yeah, great point. You mentioned the word nuisance, and so I think it is viewed as a nuisance so commonly, probably because it's so common, so prevalent. We see it every single day, and so when you see something over and over and over again, patients, doctors, everyone starts to get frustrated. So for 13, 14 years, we had one medication which works, but oftentimes doctors wait till things are so severe that they're so far down the spectrum that they need many more treatments than just one. There's no cure, there's no magic bullet. Oftentimes patients may need 6, 7 therapies until they're doing well. Then as they're doing better, you can subtract and pull some of that therapy off there. So the perception was that, for years, things don't work because doctors, I think, waited too long to get benefits from patients. We know things work better early on before the disease, age being the number one risk factor, but doctors may wait till 70, 80 years old till they start to treat. It's too far down the road. So if you treat earlier, you'll have better success. I think better success leads to happier patients, better clinical outcomes, and then you have a better understanding of how this works, and I think just a happier patient, happier doctor versus a nuisance where you feel like it's frustrating and challenging.
Yeah, I agree that if you're really actively looking for dry eye, you're going to catch it earlier. And if you treat it at that stage, it makes it much, much easier. Because I find a lot of my glaucoma patients, like I might inherit from a different practice. They've been on latanoprost for 10 years. So all that BAK they've had has really damaged the ocular surface, and it's really hard to even get back to just baseline, let alone feeling comfortable.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think something important for us to touch on before we get into really the logistics of making a dry eye practice is why is it our responsibility to our patients to start catching these things? And I think we can look at that maybe in two different age groups. Our younger patients who are starting to not like their contacts as much or can't stay on their computer as long or those sort of things. And then maybe let's look at, we've all, dealt with cataract patients being in the settings we've been in. Why is it important for those patients to have their dry eye corrected, especially in the age of having these extended focus, IOLs and other options that are really very refractively based?
Yeah, great point. So, I think there's no better profession in the world right now, especially in the United States, to do this, to take care of these patients. The baby boomers are here. We know there's a massive influx of patients who need surgical care and more advanced glaucoma surgical care, stuff like that. So we are the primary eye care providers, and then this is the most common and prevalent thing we see. So we, as the primary eye care doctor, has to treat that, diagnose it, treat it, look for it. We're typically not as busy. We're not seeing 80 patients a day like a retina doctor may do. So we have the time to do so. We're compassionate. We have the ability to do so, the structure to do so. So we're set up well to do this and be successful at it. You mentioned cataract surgery. Looking at the data is very compelling. The FACO study by Bill Trattler showed, I think, roughly 63% of patients were a level 2 that needed, something like cyclosporin or other therapies. 50% had central corneal staining, which, showed they need punctal occlusion, amniotic membranes, all the different technologies. Those are the people having surgery who oftentimes aren't even on therapy or aren't even diagnosed. And so by the time they get to the surgeon, they're frustrated. The potential outcome could be worse. Poor biometry from measuring corneal data prior to surgery, and then post-operatively, if we're seeing patients in the chair post-op care, if they haven't been treated, whether it's decreased vision afterwards or decreased outcome, and they're not happy, they're going to get complaints about their dryness, which oftentimes can be made worse after surgery. So if we can catch them on the front end, it's much better for us and patients, better success treating so, and then catch them on the back end if they're having surgery to help these patients and have better outcomes and make them feel better.
I 100% agree that you really want to try to treat the dry eye on the front end because, one, your IOL master is going to be more accurate. Patients, a lot of times, are just going to be happier going into their surgery that you already solved sort of one problem for them if they're coming in complaining of dry eye. The other issue is if you're doing a multifocal lens, these patients, they might be 20/20, but that 20/20 is going to be very poor for them. They're thinking, oh, I'm not seeing that much better than I did before the cataract surgery, but I just spent thousands of dollars on these new lenses in my eyes.
It's my favorite comment. I have awful vision, and they're 20/20 in the chair.
Yep. I see it almost too often. I wish that we sometimes would treat a little more adequately on the front end, because a lot of times I have patients that bounce around from practice to practice. Someone else put in, let's say, a symphony lens for them. They come to me like, oh, I had surgery 6 months ago. I'm still not happy with my vision. And you look and they have grade 3 staining, and you can see they have blepharitis, and relatively easy thing that you could have treated either beforehand or just within a post-op period, because you're seeing them plenty. So you can talk to the patient. And you brought up another great point that as optometrists, we might not be seeing as many patients, and we are doing primary care. So you're really learning the patient, about the patient, and a patient could come in, let's say -1 OU, and you get them glasses, and they're like, my vision's still not so good. And then you look a little bit deeper and see they have dry eye and not just other pathology. Whereas a glaucoma specialist, retina specialist, they're really just looking at one little portion of the eye, and they see their text says 20/20, and they're like, okay, good enough. And then so they send them out.
You mentioned an interesting technology, the new field, the extended depth of focal Symphony, be the only FDA-approved lens in the U.S. market right now. In the old days, with the multifocals, especially the high-ad powers, there was a lot more labor, chair time, adaptation. You lose 18% of light by diffracting that lens or diffracting that light, and so that energy is lost. It's not a perfect optical system. And then, decreased contrast sensitivity. If you start throwing other things on top of there, other risk factors that can compromise the tear film, especially dryness, meibomian gland dysfunction, you're going to have unhappier patients. So the EDF is a little bit more forgiving, so we can be a little bit less cautious about dryness. But at the end of the day, 20/20 is not necessarily 20/20 happy, 20 happy. And if there's anterior blepharitis, if there's a biofilm, if there's corneal staining, decreased tear breakup time, all these variables will lead to a decreased outcome. You just need to make sure you're taking care of that.
Are y'all seeing a shift in the demographic of dry eye? Are you seeing younger patients? Are you treating younger patients? Or do you feel like they're receptive when you have that conversation?
Yeah, I would say 100%. I'm having 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds that have pretty significant dry eye. The research is still out exactly why it's going on, but a lot of it's from our digital devices that we're using all day, every day, environmental factors like humidity in the offices. Like I'm in New York, so in the financial district, everyone's in a huge office building, air conditioning for 12 hours while you're there, and you're on the computer. And before, medications like Restasis, people would save it for more severe dry eye, and that's sort of how I was taught when I was in school. And when I had more experience with this medication, I started using it for moderate, more mild dry eye as well, because it's really working and it's really helping these patients to not only feel better, but they don't have to put in drops 5 times a day. And if they're contact lens wearers, it's really troublesome. They need their contact lens rewetting drops. Then when they're not wearing contacts, they need other drops. And then if they're reducing a contact lens wear, they come back to you like, oh, what's this contact lens you gave me? It's not comfortable anymore.
Yeah, I'll play devil advocate. I have a different subset of patients coming in, so you hear more about this, that younger patients are coming in, and that's true. I believe that, and long-term data will show that. In a large group setting where I'm at, where we have 4 corneal specialists, I'm seeing more of the train wrecks coming in for the end-stage dryness. And so we have no magic cure. We have many, many treatments we can do with now neurostimulation with TrueTear, amniotic membranes. We use ProCare in our office, and just all the therapeutics on-label and off-label. There's a lot we can do. So I'm seeing more of that older subset but you hear around the country about younger patients coming into a dry clinic. More awareness about that. I think there's just more awareness, more advertising, more competition, and just you'll see more and more younger patients coming that way. I'm just not personally seeing it.
I was in the same boat in my previous practice setting, and kind of I heard it. I went to shows, I read it, but I didn't know it myself. And even in the last few months, having shifted into full private practice, it's really interesting to see how many of my patients are coming in that are in the 20 to 35 age range and know about it. They're seeing the commercials, or they know that something just isn't like it used to be, and they're bringing it up themselves. Or maybe they're tired of tears and they're actually asking for a prescription now. That's something I never, saw before. And like you said, once I got them, they were in stage and they knew they had it, and they were just frustrated and wanted somebody to help them. How do you, maybe Dan, you direct this one at you, how do you feel is best to start that conversation with those younger patients who, they just feel like they're on the computer, too much, but they've got to be, but it's not really a condition. They don't have a disease.
So it's difficult to get young patients to buy into any sort of care. It's getting a little bit easier now because I think more young patients are going to the primary care doctor, the dentist more often, to their optometrist more often. So we are just seeing more patients coming in that are younger so we could diagnose that dry eye. But the issue is it's really you want to keep their lifestyle the same. That's how I bring it up to them. It's almost similar to the way I talk about contact lens abuse. That chances are there's not really significant microbial keratitis and ulceration you can get. It's still a pretty small percent of the population that gets that, even though high risk for some patients. I tell them, look, you can keep abusing your contacts, but in 5 years, you just won't be able to wear contacts. And at that point, they're only 35. They're like, okay, wow, I want to wear my contacts for another 50 years. So that's how the same conversation I have about dry eye. I'm like, I want to keep you at work. I want you to keep in your contact lenses. I want you to be able to have hobbies after work and not just want to go to sleep because you want to close your eyes. And that's how you really have them buy into their treatment.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. One way I've used to kind of segue, because for whatever reason, my patients seem to believe the digital eye strain side of things a little bit more than the digital dry eye side of things. So I kind of use that as a segue as well, because they do recognize when they're fatigued or when their head's starting to hurt and that sort of thing. And then I can kind of use that as a bridge into, it's not only affecting that, but it's also affecting your ocular surface.
Yeah, good point. I try to keep it really objective. So if there's tear breakup time less than 8 to 10 seconds, fluctuating vision, staining, contact lens decreased wear time or dropout, it's very objective. So if I'm seeing dryness in any of my buckets that I'm looking at, I'm going to go ahead and diagnose that patient, give them the diagnosis, and then start a treatment plan, a medical treatment plan, code and bill, and using medical insurance, start a therapeutic, bring them back. You won't win everybody, especially if they're asymptomatic and they're 30 years old. If it's a young patient that's asymptomatic, the follow-through isn't as good. The compliance isn't as good. Eventually, those patients show back up in your clinic 2 years later, 3 years later, whatever it is. At that point, they're symptomatic, or they're having decreased comfort in their contacts, and they'll buy into your diagnosis as well as your treatment plan.
Yeah, you've kind of planted the seed.
Exactly.
So now that we've kind of covered a little bit of the dry eye sort of scenario that we've got in today's world, why don't we get into a little more of the logistics of how we make this happen? We mentioned that dry eye is probably the easiest way for a clinician to introduce the medical model into their practice. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for new graduates coming into a new practice that are trying to, bring something new to the table, try to prove why they're worth bringing on as an associate. How do you get started? What do I do if I'm a new graduate and I say, yeah, I think I can do that. Let's do it.
Yeah, great question. I think the first thing is not so much the how, it's the psychology of why. Why is this important to you as a doctor? Why is it important to the patients? Why is it important to your boss? Oftentimes a new grad may come in and you got to figure out the why and why you're going to do this, why it's important. Once you get that, the how is sort of the next piece. So the how comes second. For you came to me and we're close. I'm in Atlanta and you drove down and shadowed me for a day. And so I had some mentors that came before me. And so you hung out with me for half a day just to see the X's and O's on how to do this. And you can start small. A box of fluorescein, talk to your patients. A simple way to do this and sort of become busy is just talk to your patients. Ask them if their eyes are dry, if they have fluctuating vision, stinging, burning, decreased wear in their contacts. If you just ask questions and look for this, as well as stain, those are 3 easy ways that you can become very busy because this is the most common and prevalent thing we see. As you get busier, then you can invest in technology and strict protocols for your staff and staff training, other diagnostic technology, osmolarity, mybography, all the fancy stuff we use. And then it just becomes more of a process system-wide for your whole practice, where early on, it's just, again, the psychologist saying, I'm going to do this. I'm going to take a challenge to do this niche and help my patients, and then figure out the how later on, and then it'll come to you with practice. A mentor is a great way to do that. See a big, busy, dry eye practice and see what you can incorporate into your practice, and then grow in and buy equipment as you get busier.
So I think a great opportunity for new grads is if they are entering a practice which really is more retail or optical based, they may not take medical insurances. So get on those panels for at least the most popular medical insurances in your region. And at that point, you start bringing these patients back. Like they might come in with their VSP plan or another union plan, but then you have them come back for their dry eye follow-up. So that's one more visit for you. You can help build up the schedule like that, and it's a whole new stream of patients coming in because you have medical that you're doing now. So I think there's a lot of practices out there which are going to slowly shift over to more like a mixed model if they already have it.
Did you say union? I
Plans?
love it. I love the demographics here. So we don't have a union down south, but that's awesome. That's good. To go backwards to your question too, I think there's nothing a new grad can do if you want to get busy and separate yourself from your classmates or help an associate or a senior doctor. This is the easiest way to get busy in your clinic. Allergies, meibomian gland dysfunction, dryness, whatever you call it, ocular surface disease, the most common and prevalent thing you'll see, and the easiest way to get busy doing medical optometry is this. And so you can separate yourself by sort of, championing that in your practice and doing it for the other physicians that don't want to, or be the new grad that will take on this and champion it for a practice.
Yeah, another way, depending on where you live, if it's not so densely populated, there might not be that many doctors. So if you start doing medical care, you can grab those patients not just for their dry eye care, but their glaucoma care, their AMD yearly follow-ups or biannual, and it's little by little you can build up your schedule very quickly, even though you just started with one simple thing: how do your eyes feel, and just making that patient feel better.
Yeah, I think you hit on a really interesting point, Josh, in that literally fluorescein strips are about the only thing that you need to get started. And like you said, objective measures, your tear breakups, your staining, are some of the best ways that you can monitor where your patients are. And all that takes is staining, which takes how many seconds, to put in. And it's something accessible to all of our retail locations, to all of our, single doc, group practices, OD, MD. It really doesn't matter what modality you're in, you can do it. And I think that's a point that sometimes people get caught up in, I've got to have special equipment, or I've got to have this or that. You don't. You really don't.
I think this mirrors, we have an oculoplastic surgeon in our group. This mirrors that. If you're starting cold or you're a new grad, an oculoplastic surgeon, when they come in and you're doing this in your practice, at some point you're pretty much all functional. It's all insurance through, ptosis repair, lid repair, ectropion. The goal is to flip that and get more cosmetic and fee-based services to reverse that and do more cash paying services. Same thing, I think, with optometry. You come in, you're taking all these vision plans, everything you're doing just to get busy, get people in the door, people in your chair, and then you start to flip that as you progress, seeing more medical patients, and diversifying the scope of your practice, practicing more medically oriented, which will allow you to have diverse revenue streams. Personally, I don't get as bored if you're not doing one thing all day long. I love dry because it's so challenging. There's no single bullet or single treatment for any patient. Every single dry patient we see has a different treatment based on what I'm finding that day. And so you never get bored. It's challenging, it's frustrating, which keeps you fresh, and you always have to work, which is good.
So I saw a statistic the other day that said that 20 million people are being treated for dry eye, and treatment in this category included tears and any other form of treatment. Of those 20 million, only 1.25 million were given a prescription. Why do you think that is, and why are we missing out on the other almost 95% of those patients?
I think it's what we mentioned, that people are saying, here's some tears, I'll see you next year. Or what they're doing is they're saying, here's Restasis, I'll see you next year. Or any sort of treatment like that is good. You really have to follow up on these patients. So even if I put patients on just artificial tears, TID, I tell them, come see me in 3 to 4 weeks, see how you're doing. A lot of times they go, I feel great. There's no staining anymore. They're comfortable. They're wearing their contact lenses or whatever hobbies they might have. But a lot of times those patients come back and they're like, I'm better, but still not so good. And I think that's really a big opportunity, just to have that one initial follow-up instead of, come back next year or whenever. You really want to give them that date to come in.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much more awareness now. So for decades, we felt like, 30 years ago it was just tears, then maybe non-preserved tears every hour and punctal plugs. There's been so much innovation in the space, which is great for patients and doctors. But the mindset for decades was that, maybe wait till you have severe staining to pull the trigger on cyclosporin. And then obviously if that patient's a level 3 or level 4, it's going to take so long for it to work. And then that patient may not feel like they're getting proof symptoms anyway. So I think doctors and clinicians felt like there weren't many treatment options that worked well. And so now there with DEWS 2 and all the research and awareness about that, innovation of new therapies, amniotic membranes. When patients are struggling on therapy, we can do so much more than we could 5 years ago. Thermal pulsation, if you're not happy with the outcomes from Xiidra or Restasis, Procara. So all these different things we can use. We never had this, especially as optometry, the scope of care. 10 years ago, we weren't doing that. It was just one medication, which we know works well, but not if they're so severe down the pathway. And so I think that it will shift to there are better therapeutics, new therapeutics, all kinds of different treatment options out there that can work on all these patients.
Yeah, completely agree. So let's say we started our practice. We're new grad. We've gotten or an established OD that just wants to expand their practice. We've got our fluorescein. We're diagnosing. What's the next step? What would you guys say would be the number one if you could only get one diagnostic piece? And let's stick with maybe the diagnostic in office first, and then we'll go to treatment in a minute. What would you say is your number one go-to for the first thing that you'd put in to expand your dry eye clinic?
Yeah, you sort of stole my thunder. To keep it simple, I would say just a speed questionnaire and fluorescein, which there's that's $5, whatever it is. But once you're doing this, do the X's and O's, and you're treating 5 to 7 patients a day. The next reach for me would be osmolarity. Just the benefits of that. It's almost like glaucoma. We do this now. We do all these different tests. MMP9 production, with inflammatory in our clinic, interferometry, mybography, tear osmolarity. And then we, of course, look at tear breakup time and staining, fluorescein, lissamine. All those things are great, but they get expensive if you're doing it right out of the gate. We're a busy practice that's large, and so we have the patient pool to do that. But if I'm just starting after I've maximized the sort of fluorescein and your questionnaire, I would reach for osmolarity.
So I'm a really big fan of non-invasive T-butt. So the Oculus instrument has that. There's other instruments out there as well. And it really gives you a lot of information because you might have a normal T-butt, let's say, but it might be regular, it might be patchy. There's a lot of really good information there, and you're able to get it without instilling anything into the eye. So it's sort of like the natural information you're getting from the eye.
Can you speak on kind of the financial investment to take that next step, whether it's osmolarity or tear breakup?
As far as what that costs typically?
Yeah.
So the business model has changed a little bit. Initially, years ago, Tear Lab is the only one in market right now in the United States for osmolarity measurement, I believe. And the units used to be, I think, around $10,000 to $15,000. Then you have an allotment of cards you would buy, and roughly one card per eye per test. And those cards run anywhere from $10 to, I think, $13, depending on your shipment. The units now basically are much more affordable. They give you a unit for free if you get a commitment to cards. And so they have many different models, but I know our group has a structure where we get 30 cards sent every single month on a subscription basis, and we get a free model or a free unit to do that, to check osmolarity. So it's very affordable. If you're checking 2 to 3 patients a day, you're going to burn through that inventory. Reimbursements are kind of all over the place. Commercial, for the most part, pays well. Medicare pays well. Some plans don't pay well. It's not why we're doing it. We're doing it to get the data, and so there's a nice financial bonus to this, but the big benefit of doing it is just the clinical science and the data.
Okay, so if you're going to get an instrument that can measure non-invasive T-butt, it's going to be an investment. You can get used, new, it's at $20,000, $30,000, but it's also a topographer. It can also do external images to some extent, not like a slit lamp camera, of course. So there are other revenue sources within that one unit. So don't think of it just, it's not just one thing. It's not just for dry eyes. So if you're also doing contact lenses, RGPs, it's great. You have a topographer right there as well. And there's always financing available. A lot of these different distributors, if you go straight from the company, they're always different types of plans that they have.
So one of the biggest things that I think I looked at when I came and visited you, Josh, was kind of how did start to finish look? You know, what was the patient doing when they checked in? You mentioned the speed questionnaire. What were they doing when the technician called them back? What kind of workup was the tech doing? What kind of workup were you doing? Can you kind of run through what that typical, you know, exam or patient encounter looks like in a dry eye practice?
Sure. So, you know, I treat dryness every day, 5 days a week, but in an esoteric dry clinic, roughly about 3 days a week. And so day to day, it's what we talked about, just talking to your patients and staining them. In a dry clinic, they check in. We tried the speed questionnaire for years. We just couldn't get it really to take off because we have a large staff. But I do recommend that. It's a good test that's fast, and it will help you and your staff and your patients, you know, exhibit or learn about their symptoms there. So speed questionnaire check-in. They then get pulled back by a technician, and they'll go through osmolarity. They'll go through interferometry first. Before that, we use LipiView, osmolarity, and then inflammodry last. And so then they come to us. I'll look at that chart before I see the patient and look at that data. We do myography as well with the LipiScan. So I'll look at the LipiScan, look at the LipiView numbers, looking at the tear film thickness as well as the partial blinks and how many blinks they did, frequency, osmolarity, and MMP9, yes or no, is it positive? And then I'll go in, talk to that patient, of course. For me, it's keeping it simple. Talk to them about their symptoms. And then, you know, do that fluorescein, look at a tear breakup time, fluorescein. I'll use lissamine green if I'm sort of scratching my head or on a baseline exam. But most of this is done prior for me seeing the patient on all those different diagnostics. Looking at all those variables, I can sort of hone in on what the main cause is and then make this more efficient. But that's what it looks like. The big thing for me on a new patient, my time is diagnosing the disease and educating them on the treatment plan. We give a tear-off sheet that checks all the boxes on X, Y, and Z, how they work, how long it takes for them to work, when I'll see them back, and go over the big picture, what they're going to experience. You know, if you say there's a cure and you'll be better in 2 weeks, it's not going to be good for anybody. And so set the expectations clear and then have them come up appropriately.
So in my office, it's a little bit different. We have a lot of patients who don't speak English, so a lot of times questionnaires are difficult to implement in my office. So a lot of what I go by is I have the patient in the room, and I go, okay, so what brings you in today? It might be the glaucoma follow-up, but I go, you know, my eyes are burning. Right there, the patient tells you they have that problem, and that's where I start my exam. I'm looking for dry eye in all patients, but especially if they tell me my eyes are burning, that's gonna be the number one thing I'm looking for before I even check IOP and all that. And as you go through the exam, depending on the severity of the dry eye, like sort of in your head, you always have a protocol that's grade 3, grade 1 staining. You know what you're going to do. Is a 25-year-old patient, is an 80-year-old patient, is a patient on 3 glaucoma medications. So as you're seeing these dry eye patients, you'll have your own protocol and your own style of treatment. And I agree, education is the most important part. With any chronic disease, you really have to have the patient buy into it. Because if they're not buying into it, they're not going to do the treatment. And if they're not doing treatment, then you sort of wasted your visit there. Another big thing is also expectation as well. That sometimes I have like really severe dry eye patients, and I'll put them on, you know, topical pred. And I tell them, look, come back 2-3 weeks, you should be feeling significantly better. And they come in like, yeah, I do feel much better. Maybe not 100%, but they're feeling better. And right there, you already opened the window that patient trusts you. Like you already did something great for them. And 2-3 weeks is great when they've been suffering for years. So that's a big thing as well.
Yeah, I think you both touched on the importance of, one, patient education, but two, not over-promising. I think a lot of times, unfortunately, we're so eager to make them happy and fix it because we genuinely want them to feel better that maybe we over-promise a little bit in the beginning. And I think you mentioned setting the bar low. I think that's very important. What I've seen in my dry eye patients, if I really give them a realistic expectation of where they're going to be in a month or whenever the follow-up is, they come in much happier. Like you said, maybe they come back and say, I'm not 100%, but I'm happier. I'm better. I notice a difference. And then you can take that next step depending on, you know, some patients are happy being 80% fixed and they're not going to buy into another treatment because they're fine with their tears. But you can have that conversation at that point. What does it look like financially for a patient to come in and get a workup, like you mentioned, you know, front to back, all the bells and whistles, everything's being run? Is this all things that we can bill to medical insurance, or is this out of pocket?
Great question. So I work in a practice. We don't take any vision plans at all because we're sort of a tertiary care referral. So I have it easy. They know they're coming in with only one option, and that's medical insurance. So it's not real world or optometry. I think most optometrists take medical and vision. And so I always recommend, technically it's up to the chief complaint. That's going to dictate which plan you're going to go to. So if the patient complains they're there for glasses or a refractive reason, you're going to bill the vision insurance at that time. But if the chief complaint is medically warranted, something about dryness, that patient still may want to exhaust their benefits for VSP or whatever it is, but you can steer them that way if it's visual, significant as far as the dryness. Regardless of what you're doing, I always recommend prescribing a therapy. If I have in the old days we did take vision plans. If I had a dry patient and they're there for VSP to get glasses, I would still prescribe Restasis and educate them on the disease state, but that's my secondary diagnosis. My primary, is myopia, and we'll exhaust that vision plan. If you start a medical treatment, they're more compliant and more likely to come back and see for follow-up. So if you don't do anything at that time, they're not getting better, they're not on therapy, they may not come back to you in 6 to 8 weeks or whatever you ask them to come back for a dry exam because there's not a compelling reason to. But if you start a therapy, I think they're going to take you serious as a physician, and that you listened to their symptoms and saw the signs and symptoms to treat this, they'll come back. Then at that point, you would bill the vision. In our clinic, we only use medical insurance. Initially it's like a 92004 if it's a comprehensive eye exam. The first follow-up is like a 92012. I may see them back at 4 weeks if we're using steroids off-label. If we're not, 6 to 8 weeks for that first follow-up. 92012 every single time until they're better. Once they're stable or improved, then I'll down code to a 99213. So this is almost like glaucoma. You're putting them on that treadmill, seeing these patients 3 and 4 times. Eventually they'll get stable, and you can put them on a biannual basis or once a year. And you're not, seeing them every 4 months for no reason, but it is a very profitable niche. It's not why we're doing it, but if you're private practice and want to build, a new business model, it's an easy way to get busy pretty quick and build a new revenue stream.
Can you bill all of those tests that you mentioned, your osmolarity, your lipid flow, your all of that to medical insurance if they come in?
Great question. So we bill to your lab, osmolarity to the medical insurance. I recommend billing KCS right eye, left eye. So keratoconjunctivitis sicca, H16.221 and H16.222, linking that with a right and left eye. We'll bill tier lab to the insurance plan. We'll bill MMP9 detection, which is inflammatory, to the insurance as well. Myography, sometimes we charge, sometimes we don't, but on a new dry screen, typically if we're doing LipiView interferometry as well as a LipiScan, myography, our patients pay $40 out of pocket. If they get LipiFlow down the road, that $40 goes towards credit to bring the cost down. Everything else is either done for free or billed to insurance. So worst case scenario is maybe $40 out of pocket for a diagnostic test. We often retail a lot of therapeutics at checkout, which then are a separate discussion, but usually about $40 for LipiView.
So in my practice, it's also all medical insurance. A huge amount of my patients come in, they already have a problem. So they're not really coming in like, oh, I'm here for my yearly. I don't really do as much as a high-tech dry eye management like you do. So for me, it's mostly the 92004 if it's their first exam, then 92001, 92012, and so on and so on. So I'm getting mostly just from the exam payment.
Can y'all touch on really briefly why you do the 92 code at the follow-up instead of like a 99213?
Good question. So, to keep it basic and not get into like the world of consulting, but in general, and obviously there's many measures you have to do to meet those measures based on your exam level, what you're doing, and the eye codes are less frequently used in healthcare, so they're only used by optometry and ophthalmology. Because of that, they're less frequently scrutinized, less auditing and that sort of thing. The E&M codes, the 992 codes, those sort of things are used by every healthcare provider out there, and so a podiatrist can use that code and for conjunctivitis, whatever it is. So there's a little bit more scrutiny typically, and then typically the 92 codes, eye codes reimburse a little bit higher. We use a high-level consulting group that kind of teaches us, so that's sort of the generic answer there. There's way more deeper answers there and legal issues, but usually there's less scrutiny and a little bit higher reimbursements. The key I've learned from the consultants is once they're stable or improved, then you want to down code to a 99213 as long as all those other measures have been met at that point.
So very similar. Once they're stable, where they're coming in, you're just making sure they're using their drops, they're compliant, that nothing else is popping up, that they're developing worse blepharitis when they also only had aqueous deficient dry eye before. So that's when I'll do the 99 code. But usually it's a 92 code because, again, reimbursement is greater and you're actively changing treatments very often. So for a patient that came in for a 92004, told him come back in 2 or 3 weeks, I put him on pred, and then I'm changing the treatment again from then on. So at that point, I might start Restasis, or you might plug them, or blepharitis treatment, whatever it might be.
It's a good point. You're always adjusting therapy. You're not just seeing the same thing and doing the same thing. It's always in that same level of coding. You're adding or changing, adjusting therapy that allows you to do that.
Great points. So let's shift a little bit over to the treatment side of things. Of course, everybody knows tears. Patients know tears from commercials. They know them from the store. Where do you guys start when you have that first patient? They've never been diagnosed, or maybe they've been told once or twice, but they don't do anything about it. Where do you start, and when does prescription drops, Xiidra, Restasis, whatever it may be, come into play, and other treatments of that sort?
So for me, I usually start all my patients on artificial tears. If they've never had anything, if they're completely naive to any treatment, I'll start with artificial tears. I'll tell them, use it 3 times a day. I'll see you 3, 4, 6 weeks, whatever. Sometimes it depends on their schedule, it depends on my schedule. And from there, you take it as it goes. If they're feeling significantly better, if they're 80%, they're happy, like you were saying, that's it. I'll see them for their yearly, maybe at that point. If it's maybe like a very healthy 30-year-old patient, very mild dry eye, I'll say, you know what, I'll just see you for your yearly, and that's it. If it's a patient, let's say it's like a glaucoma patient, they're on a drop that has BAK in it, I jump to Restasis much quicker in those patients, because Restasis will help sort of counteract a lot of the BAK effects. But so it's really patient-based on me. Like you were saying, every dry eye patient's unique. So I would say that I am going to use Restasis, I am going to use steroids off-label, but it's really patient-specific. And it's also specific to their needs, that if they might have grade 1 staining that we see, but they might be miserable. So if they're saying this is the worst my eyes have ever felt in years, I might put them on pred even if they have grade 1 SBK at that point.
Yeah, I try to make it simple and keep patients in one of 4 buckets. So what I would call level 1 is someone with mild symptoms, no staining, no decreased tear breakup time less than 10 seconds, no contact lens comfort issues. So level 1, a box of tears, a good therapeutic, TheraTears, Refresh Optiva Advanced, Sustain Balance, sort of the newer technology tears, twice a day. And that's my threshold. If they're using it more than twice a day, to me that puts them into a level 2. So I'll educate them. Your eyes are, you're complaining about dryness. I don't really see much dryness. Let's try these artificial tears twice a day. If you're doing well, we'll see you back in a year. If you're using it more than twice a day, there's better therapeutics out there that will always outperform tears. So anyone walking in using tears more than twice a day, or that has to convert down the road using tears more than twice a day, that's already a level 2 patient for me. The DU's guidelines and ITF guidelines and the experts around the world sort of put those patients in a patients where they need like cyclosporin. Now we have Xiidra as well. Level 2, inferior punctate keratitis staining, mild to moderate symptoms, maybe mild or severe symptoms, but minimal staining. Level 3 for me is more severe symptoms, and then diffuse staining or central keratitis staining. And at that point, you're doing, kind of everything. It's always about lid hygiene, so kind of front to back. Look at the lashes. Is there Demodex involved? Anterior bleph, saponification, that's going to cause some symptoms there, so we'll do a lid hygiene. Oftentimes, I'd say 9 out of 10 patients walk out of our clinic with a hypocourse acid treatment that we buy and sell. We use Avenova in our clinic. Bruder mask is what we use a lot of as well to help that obstruction, get those glands working better, and that's sort of the external part of this, helping that biofilm and obstruction and help these glands work better. And then the ocular surface, it's going to be initially a level 2 Restasis or Xiidra, off-label use of steroids if they're real severe or more staining. Plugs we put in, omegas, all those different therapies. If I see them and they're severe and a lot of staining or diffuse staining, I'll do off-label steroid, sometimes Restasis 4 times a day. You're sort of doing everything kitchen sink treatments at them, seeing them back frequently. As they get better, we'll subtract and pull off some of that therapy. If they're still not where they want to be, then we'll keep adding therapy until we get them where they need to be. Amniotic membranes have been a great therapy in our clinic to speed treatment up, to help these other treatments work faster. If it's a level 3 patient with severe symptoms and diffuse or central keratitis, that's something we can do to help speed up all these therapies where before we maybe had to wait 2 or 3 months to get symptomatic improvement. LipiFlow, we do IPL, we sort of do it all, but it's just a stepwise algorithm based on level 1, 2, 3, or 4.
Great. I would say my approach is very similar to both of you guys. My tears, I tend to start with 4 times a day only because I know they're probably going to use it twice if I say 4. But I give them a specific name of a tear. You know, I don't say go to Walmart or Walgreens or wherever and just get a tear. For the reason that then it becomes more of a prescription in their mind. It's more of a true treatment. It's not just go get something over the counter, maybe you'll feel better. They really feel a little more invested. I found that the new Refresh Mega 3 is having a lot of effect on some, especially female patients. And no matter what level I'm stopping at, I'm having the lifestyle conversations. I'm having the no ceiling fans, you know, the increased water intake, your fish oils, the Mega 3s, things like that. You mentioned selling some products in your office. What would you recommend a practice start with? And, you know, what can you sell? Do you have to have special license to do that? How does that work?
Good question. So we have a sheet we give, and it highlights all the treatments. So there's every option we use, and then I check the boxes if we're going to use that treatment. Initially, what's most important to me is what's most efficacious, and so usually that's using our DEA license, you know, prescribing a therapeutic. So I want to do what's most, you know, minimally effective dose and try to prescribe what I can up front. If you give a patient 10 things and they're trying to buy 6 things at checkout, the confusion goes up, compliance goes down, and then they're just going to go elsewhere and get frustrated. So I'll keep it simply initially, and usually that's, you know, a prescription FDA-approved medication. And then I would say 9 times out of 10, they're going to leave our office with a Bruder mask, as well as we use Avenova. And so hypochlorous acid, and I think Ocusoft as a competitive product, does really, really well. It's the first treatment I've sort of given in office that people come back actively seeking to buy there. And so those 2 things, I assume they're already on tiers. We'll just make sure it's a good tier, like you mentioned. And then if I see them back in a follow-up at 4 weeks or 6 to 8 weeks, then we start talking about omegas. Most patients are on omegas. We retail Hydro Eye in our clinic, and so there are 2 that have been really studied well enough to show they actually have clinical improvements in dry eye. The product from PRN as well as Hydro Eye, we retail Hydro Eye. I don't want to hit them up front initially with all of this stuff because it becomes too salesy. I do what's most important first off, and then as they're doing well in therapy, then we start talking about adjunctive therapy we offer. But I think if you try to sell 4 or 5 things to a patient, you sort of lose them a little bit. We'll get them down the road, not because it's profitable, it's because it's what's best. Are patients using the right products? Are they using the best products? And what's the most efficacious?
So I don't sell so many products in my office, but a great thing that Allergan's doing is you could sell Refresh tiers right at your office, and just like you're saying, you can prescribe that particular tier. So I want you to use this Refresh over that one, and it might depend on age group, depend on symptoms, different things like that, and it makes it more like a pharmaceutical medication and not just a moisturizer to get in over the counter. So I would say that's always a great option with Allergan nowadays.
Yeah, that's a great point. Is there anything y'all want to add to close? Any reasons or extra pearls that you may have?
I would say one big thing is if you really want to start treating dry eye, just learn about it. You know, Dry Eye Workshop, great resource right there. A big thing that they're stating out is always inflammation. I don't care if it's MGD, blepharitis related, there's going to be some level of inflammation somewhere within that eye. And that's, I think, a really big change in how I was taught dry eye. You know, I didn't graduate that long ago, only a few years back. And inflammation wasn't such a big thing. It was those Sjogren's patients. But now you can also think diabetic patients, they're also going to have significant dry eye. Hypertensive patients, it's beta blockers are going to have an effect on their eyes. So really, almost every medication out there might lead to dry eye. So don't think that when you look at an intake form and you see rheumatoid arthritis, oh, I have to ask about dry eye. Also ask your diabetic patients about dry eye. Ask your hypertensive patients about dry eye. So it's really a much larger base than you might think classically what dry eye patients are.
Yeah, I'll leave with 2 large pearls. One is, you know, if you decide to do this, start dabbling in it. You know, talk to your patients, start using fluorescein, and then as you get busier, go see a mentor. Find a mentor in your community that's doing this at a high level. It's busy, so sort of see what you can learn from them and adapt. And to mention what Danny said, to learn as much as you can. It takes time. You know, it took me a long time to get what I feel at a level where I felt like I was making an impact. It's highly rewarding, but it's a process, and it's going to take a while. You know, not just a week, but months and years, and then you'll get better with time. And there's plenty of opportunity to practice a lot. The second thing is to, I think you studied real hard in school, and so you got a DA license, you're a physician, prescribe therapy. So much of our clinicians just give tears and walk away. And so there are good therapeutics out there that work and work pretty quick. If things aren't working, to echo what you said, it's probably a systemic disease that's out of whack, or there's other variables going on. It's not that easy. Is there lag ophthalmos going on, anterior blepharitis, micro lag ophthalmos, Demodex? It's sort of a front to back disease, from the lids all the way back to lacrimal gland, looking at that whole lacrimal functional unit. There are, 2 FDA approved therapies, but oftentimes if someone's struggling, you have to do 5, 6, 7 therapies, and then, as they're doing better, pull off. So if you're struggling with this, look for other things, what's going on, whether it's systemic disease or maybe you're missing something, you need more therapy there.
I would completely agree with both of those points. I think for me, my most important, kind of pearl would be, one, get started. Don't be intimidated by it. Don't think it's going to take you half an hour extra in the exam room every time the patient's there. The more you talk about it, the more comfortable you're going to be with it. The more you see it, the more you're going to know maybe why something isn't working. Is it patient compliance versus truly not working? And don't be afraid to try something else. I say that when I'm doing glaucoma talks, that if the first thing doesn't work, that doesn't mean the second's not going to. Do the same thing with dry eye. And I had a professor in school who used to say that the most profitable OD in this class would be the one who remembered the GONIO code, because nobody ever bills for it. I think dry is exactly the same. You can increase your revenue so many times by just looking, asking, paying attention, and taking that little bit of extra time. It helps you build relationships. If you can help that 40-year-old mom, you're going to get the entire family. So use that one little question, ask them, talk to them, and it'll really make a huge impact in the practice. All right. Well, we're going to wrap it up. Thanks, guys, for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and have a great day.